Good morning and welcome to the March 19th Victim Compensation Board meeting. For those of you in the room that are appearing on a specific agenda item or wish to offer public comment, the microphones at the podium and tables are directional and require that you hold them fairly close to your mouth when speaking to ensure your testimony is captured by our audio equipment. For members and participants who are appearing via Zoom, if you cannot hear the presenter, please use the comment feature to note that, as staff are monitoring the comments in real time. Council, please call the roll.
Member Becton.
Present.
Member Johnson.
Here.
Chair Ravel.
Present.
Good morning, everyone. Item 1 is the Executive Officer Statement, which will be presented by Executive Officer Linda Gledhill.
Good morning, board members. On the agenda today is our recommendation for funding for trauma recovery centers, which, as you all know, continues to be a challenging item because CalVCB yet again received the highest request for funding from the largest number of organizations in grant programs history. The increased demand for TRCs far outweighs the funding available to award, making this grant very competitive. As we previously projected, there's not enough funding to support all current organizations. Many previously funded organizations that did not receive grants last year also applied and submitted competitive applications. I want to acknowledge the impact on the communities with existing TRCs that do not receive a consecutive grant and the unfortunate reduction in services for those victims. I also wanted to share that the Legislative Analyst's Office published an article regarding the estimate of savings from Prop 47, which are placed in the Safe Neighborhood and Schools Fund. While the LAO recognized that any Prop 47 saving estimates are subject to significant uncertainty, they did identify an issue with the administration's methodology that they believe results in a structural underestimate of these savings. The LAO has recommended that the administration correct this methodology in the May revision. And so while we don't know for sure, we are anticipating that the amount of Prop 47s will increase in the May revise, which has been the case for the previous couple of years. We will continue to support additional funding for this program, and I look forward to discussing in more detail and answering all your questions when we get to this item later in the agenda. As I shared with the board via email, CalVCB has resolved the issue regarding attorney's fees. We have established a way to pay attorney's fees using only state general fund dollars and issued all outstanding payments. This solution allows us to issue payments to attorneys moving forward while also complying with new federal grant requirements that disallow attorney payments for undocumented immigrants. We appreciate the collaboration between Government Operations Agency, Department of Finance, and the State Controller's Office in helping us resolve this very important issue. In January, the board authorized CalVCB to begin the rulemaking process on a package of regulations related to mental health reimbursement. That notice was published on February 13th, and we sent this notice to more than 5,400 stakeholders, including all the mental health providers that we have contact information for. The 45-day period for public comment will end on March 30th, but we have received a request for a public hearing, and that will be held on May 7th from 1 to 3 p.m., and that information will be posted on our website. I also wanted to share some updates about multiple audits that have been taking up some of our time here at CalVCB. At the end of February, the Federal Office of Victims of Crime performed an on-site monitoring review. The purpose of this visit is always to ensure that the Federal Victims of Crime Act grant funding is being used for the authorized purposes and in compliance with federal statutes, regulations, and the terms and conditions of the grant agreement. The federal government also evaluates if performance goals are achieved. The team did an exceptional job explaining our processes and timely providing all of the requested documentation. And we are currently awaiting the results from this review. In closed session, we'll be discussing the draft report from the California State Auditors on state and local restitution oversight. That report is confidential until released, which is scheduled for spring of 2026. Additionally, the State Controller's Office has completed an audit of the expenditure and disbursement of Prop 47 grant funds that support the TRC program. They evaluated CalVCB's procedures, internal controls for overseeing the grant award process, program monitoring, expenditure review, and maintenance of accounting records. They verified that CalVCB's administrative costs were allowable and properly supported. And we're happy to share that the SCO had no findings or recommendations. During the exit conference this week, they complimented the steps the team has taken since the last audit to improve grant oversight. And this report, they said, is expected to be public in a few months. I just want to take a moment and thank all of our CalVCB staff who have worked so hard on these efforts. Each audit alone is a huge undertaking, and we had multiple audits running at the same time, and it really was a toll on a lot of people, and so I want to thank all of them for their hard work. It's the civilian ad campaign that we've talked quite a bit about at the board meeting has ended as of the end of February, and our vendor is currently conducting a post-campaign survey to measure the effectiveness of the awareness campaign and working on a final report, and we hope to provide the board a full update on that campaign at the May board meeting. Finally, I want to note that April is not that far away and always a meaningful and active month for our department as we recognize National Crime Victims' Rights Week, Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and Denim Day. These observances give us an important opportunity to affirm our commitment to supporting survivors and raise awareness about victims' rights. In that spirit, we'll once again host our annual Denim Drive in April. And this year, the donations will go to support the Rape Crisis Center at Tri-Valley Haven in Livermore, which is an organization that provides vital support to survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence. Their comprehensive services include a round-the-clock crisis line, sexual assault response team, and essential support such as shelter, food, and clothing. Also on April 16th, CalVCB will host a virtual webinar for advocates focused on supporting survivors of sexual assault. And I'll be on a webinar with partners from Valor and the California Clinical Forensic Medical Training Center to discuss critical resources, advocacy services, and comprehensive healthcare support available to survivors. I'm also contacting leaders of county victim witness assistance centers to collaborate information about CalVCB's updated resource and materials. Again, this is always an ongoing effort, but April is a month where we try to take extra time to make sure that we're connecting and letting victims of crime know about the resources available to them. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Executive Officer Gledhill. That's great news about the attorney fees. Thank you for sharing that. I'm really happy that worked out relatively quickly, and congratulations on the successful completion of those audits as well. Are there any questions and comments on the Executive Officer report from the board?
If I may. I just want to thank you for your prompt work on that attorney's fees question. I know that's a sticky one, and you rose to the occasion. I really appreciate the work on that. Thanks.
Thank you. Item 2 is a legislative update, which will be presented by Deputy Executive Officer Katie Gardinas.
Good morning. The legislature's deadline to introduce bills has passed, and I would like to highlight some of the bills that we are following. AB 1716 by Assemblymember Stefani would expand CalVCB reimbursement to include tuition payments. Students who are unable to continue attendance or suffer an academic setback as a result of a crime could receive up to $10,000 to reimburse tuition costs. This bill passed out of the Assembly Public Safety Committee on March 10th and was referred to the Assembly Appropriations Committee. SB 1122 by Senator Arreguin and AB 2247 by Assemblymember El-Hawari are both spot bills that may amend statutes related to CalVCB. Spot bills must be amended to include substantive language in March in order to continue forward. Finally, AB 2119 by Assemblymember Jackson would require the California Department of Public Health, or CDPH, to develop and distribute materials educating the public that all genders may be the victim of sexual assault and domestic violence. It would require CDPH to collaborate with CalVCB, the Office of Emergency Services, and victim advocacy groups in developing the materials. This bill will be heard in the Assembly Public Safety Committee on March 24th. Those are the highlights, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Deputy Cardenas. Are there any questions or comments from board members? Thank you.
Thank you. The next item is public comment. This is the opportunity for the public to comment on items that are not on the agenda. As any items discussed during public comment have not been agendized, the board is not permitted to take any action on these matters at this meeting. Please note, if you wish to offer public comment regarding any item after this point on the agenda, there will be a separate call for the public comment when those those items are heard by the board. For those participating via telephone, if you wish to offer public comment during this meeting, you can raise your hand by pressing *9 on your phone. For those participating via Zoom, please raise your hand if you wish to offer comment, and we will acknowledge you and let you know when it is your turn to speak. Seeing none. Moving to item 4 is the approval of the minutes for the January 15th, 2026 board meeting.
Thank you. Is there any discussion, additions, or corrections to the minutes from the board? Do I have a motion to approve item 4?
Move to approve.
I second.
Is there any public comment on this item?
Council, please call the roll.
The motion before the board is approval of the January 15th, 2026 minutes. Member Becton.
Aye.
Member Johnson.
Aye.
And Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Item 5 is the contract update, which will be presented by Deputy Executive Officer Sean Ramirez.
Good morning, board members. For today's contract report, we have one item requesting approval for. This is an interagency agreement with the Government Operations Agency for $300,000 for a 3-year term ending June 30, 2029. This is to provide ongoing administrative support, including representation, facilitation, and consultation. The other items on the contract report are informational. We request your approval on this item.
Thank you, Deputy Ramirez. I'd like to note for the record that I'm an employee of the Government Operations Agency, and so I am going to recuse myself from any discussion or voting on this item under Government Code Section 1091.5. Well, if there's any discussion, or I'll entertain a motion to.
I'll move to approve.
I second.
Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none.
Council, please call the roll.
The motion before the board is approval of the executive officer's execution of the contract with Government Operations Agency and the amount of $300,000. Member Becton.
Aye.
Member Johnson.
Aye.
And with Chair Ravel abstaining, the motion passes 2-0.
Thank you. Item 6 is a proposal to approve fiscal year 2026-27 Trauma Recovery Center Grant Awards, which will be presented by Deputy Executive Officer Katie Gardinas.
I'm here today to request approval of staff's recommendation for funding Trauma Recovery Center grants. CalVCB is charged with administering the Trauma Recovery Center grant process. TRC grants are awarded on a 2-year cycle based on scores from the competitive process and the amount of funding available. Next slide, please. Since this presentation last year, I'd like to acknowledge the engagement from the board, TRC stakeholders, and my team in discussing and identifying opportunities to improve processes and transparency in the TRC grant process. While the TRC grant program still faces a very challenging fiscal situation, the steps we've taken have resulted in positive changes to the grant administration process. For this grant cycle, CalVCB first clarified the Notice of Funds Available, or NOFA, based on feedback from stakeholders. We also ensured it followed plain language principles. CalVCB published the NOFA in October, so it would be due before the holidays, and extended the period for application submission by 15 days. Staff hosted a webinar in October to walk organizations through the NOFA, and in November, we responded to questions applicants and submitted and posted those answers on our website to ensure fairness in the process. During the scoring process, we identified 2 differences from past cycles. First, some of the currently and previously funded TRCs requested lower funding amounts than in previous years, with 4 of the top 6 scorers requesting less than the previously used $2.2 million benchmark. Second, we saw scores improve for most organizations that had previously submitted applications. We believe that the discussions that we've had over the past year have contributed to these changes. Next slide, please. We unfortunately also saw a continuation of past year's trends in that much more money was requested than is available to grant. As we've previously shared, there's difficulty in maintaining the grant administration of this important work due to the disproportionate increase in applications against insufficient funding to accommodate all of these requests. 42 organizations applied for TRC funding this year, the highest number ever. And this is, again, the largest gap between available funding and requests in the history of the TRC grant program. As you know, the only guaranteed funding for the TRC program is the $2 million that comes from the Restitution Fund. Additional funding comes from the Safe Neighborhood and Schools Fund, which is projected to decrease due to the passage of Prop 36. One-time general funds from the Budget Act of 2022 that supported the growth of the TRC network in California ended last fiscal year. The proposal presented today is based on available funding according to the governor's January budget. CalVCB anticipates receiving the final funding numbers with the May revise. The application scoring process is consistent with previous board-approved practice. Staff take the minimum qualifications as outlined in statute, and grantees who meet those minimum qualifications are objectively scored. Narrative criteria equal 60 of the 100 points of the application. They include each organization's experience and ability to implement components of the TRC model, including conducting assertive outreach, serving a wide range of victims, and offering evidence-based mental health services using a multidisciplinary team of clinicians. The final 10-point question evaluates their ability to serve the greatest number of victims in a geographic location. 40 of the 100 points are for administrative components, including budget materials, a client flowchart, and a time task plan. These scores are used to develop the recommendation we put before the board. Next slide, please. Of the 42 applicants, there are 33 organizations that met minimum qualifications, with scores ranging from 35 to 87 points out of 100. 9 applications were disqualified because they did not meet the minimum qualifications outlined in state law. Although 33 applicants demonstrated they could meet minimum qualifications, although some with very low scores, CalVCB only recommends awarding funding to the top 6 applicants based on the amount of funding available. Next slide, please. This recommendation does result in largely funding existing and former TRCs located in population-dense areas in Southern California. This map shows those organizations and the TRCs funded last fiscal year. With both, we do continue to meet our objective of providing TRC services across the state with TRCs in the Bay Area, Northern, Central, and Southern California regions. We recognize that we continue to have limited representation in the Central Valley with only one organization in Gilroy. However, the organizations that applied from the Central Valley received lower scores. The highest scoring Central Valley organization from Kern County received the 12th highest score, with others scoring even lower. Many current or previously funded TRCs would receive funding before these organizations per the process established in the NOFA. Next slide, please. We currently estimate total funding to equal $10.5 million. Qualified applicants requested $62 million. 4 of the top 6 scoring applicants requested less than the $2.2 million previously used as a benchmark for funding. Because of this, CalVCB is not recommending that we use the tiered funding approach that we have applied in previous years. This recommendation was not reached without much consideration. Our team ran a multitude of alternative scenarios, each of which resulted in reducing the award so significantly that we were concerned TRCs would not be fiscally operational. Funding one additional organization requires discounting the awards for the top 6 scoring organizations, with 2 receiving less than $1 million to operate over the 2-year cycle. CalVCB does recommend that the board apply the $2.2 million cap to the 2 organizations that did request more than this amount, with one adjustment. When running the funding scenarios, a little over $84,000 remained. Since this funding is not sufficient to support another TRC, we've recommended splitting it between the 2 organizations that requested the more than $2.2 million. The cap is still needed, or only the top 4 organizations would receive funding. Therefore, after thoughtful consideration, staff recommend funding the 6 highest scoring TRCs. This recommendation includes funding 4 currently funded TRCs and 2 previously funded TRCs. This recommendation prioritizes giving organizations enough money to successfully operate based on what they requested and the $2.2 million benchmark. As we heard during the informational hearing last year, TRC organizations need sufficient funding to be functional. We didn't arrive at this recommendation lightly and understand that the communities with existing TRCs that are not recommended for continued funding will be impacted. However, we believe that this recommendation is the best to balance the viability and success of the most qualified TRCs given the funding available. We seek that the board approve the Trauma Recovery Center grant awards as recommended and further authorize staff to increase or decrease these awards as necessary to reflect the funds available following the release of the governor's revised budget in May, in alignment with the methodology presented in this board item.
Thank you, Deputy Cardenas, for all the work that you and staff put into this. I know it was a huge effort and calls for a lot of tough decisions and trade-offs. I welcome any discussion regarding the TRC proposal from the board.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Cardenas. I know this is always difficult, right? You know, there's limited funds, there's huge need, and I think we're all in agreement on that. So I really appreciate the work of staff and the recommendations you put forward today. I know they're very thoughtful and take into account some of the feedback you received at the hearing that we had last year. So with that being said, I did want to explore just a little bit some of the questions around how we're representing both geography and crime rate in the process, just to make sure we are accurately addressing the needs of the statute or the demands of the statute that enables this program. Can you tell me a little bit about how we take into account geography and crime rate in the process, both in the application and the evaluation of that?
So geography is 10 points of the 6 narrative questions. So the last narrative question organizations are asked to respond to basically requests that they give us information about the crime rate in their area, the availability of current services, the availability of what they would add, what would be the deficit if they weren't funded, and then also looking at it's an entire evaluation of what's available within their region, right? And so some organizations end up including information about other TRCs that might be within their region. They'll also include information about other support services that are in their region. They do include that information about crime rates. And so within that scoring category, if you can demonstrate that need, you'll receive higher points on that 10-point question. And when we step back, we have objectively scored all of the applications and taken into consideration the other 5 qualifications, which are around the model and your ability to implement the model. It becomes part of the ranking with the final score.
That's helpful. And, you know, I know that question 6 there on the NOFA aims at geography and crime rate. How do you then think about sort of distribution across the state when it comes to addressing crime rates statewide and victims of violent crime across the totality of California?
So again, it's represented in the scores, right? And so that qualification, if you receive a higher score, then you're more likely to be ranked in the top, assuming that you also are able to provide the other services outlined in those qualifications. I know in the November board meeting, we had a summary of the recommendations that were made during the July informational meeting, and one was around changing some of these ideas. And I think from our perspective, those are policy decisions that have to be made. And so the current process is what I described. I think changing the evaluation of that current process is a different discussion.
And I guess I have one more question along those lines, and I appreciate you indulging me on this. You know, thinking about year to year, do those questions accurately capture the sort of the need when you're comparing one year to another, or is there even a way to compare one year to another? Say you provide 2 in LA County, 2 in San Diego County, 1 in Riverside, 1 in San Francisco this year. Right, that's I think what's on the docket. How does that reflect next year in consideration?
So, I mean, it's all dependent on who applies, right? And so I think that we have 11 organizations that we funded last year that are likely to reapply for consecutive grants next year. And I come back to kind of the overall funding when I hear your line of questions, Member Johnson, because I think the difficulty in this is that we've consistently seen over the last couple of years that there's greater need than we can fund. And so we've tried to be more precise even in this board item by making it more clear about the service areas that folks are serving. In the past, we've provided you county information. We've tried to be very specific about within that county, these are the specific areas that they're serving. That there's currently no process to say, okay, we have 2 in LA, so we're not going to fund another one in LA. And so, again, I think that going back to the November board item, those are policy decisions in terms of changing the way we approach the grant that we would have to decide on. And we would decide on at the board's direction.
And I appreciate that. You know, I think I struggle a little bit looking at the history of this program. Obviously, you know, I've heard that these, you know, the applicants from the less represented regions, historically less represented regions in this program, don't score as well, and I understand that. That being said, the statutory requirement here for the board in our work is to consider geography and crime rate to address the greatest number of victims, right? And I don't think when we think about geography, I don't think geography as in, and maybe this is a misinterpretation, but you know, I don't think geography as in this block or that block. It's, are we hitting all parts of the state? Are we hitting the places where violent crime happens? You know, I think the challenge I have is looking backwards. San Francisco, the highest crime rate places in California, county-wise. San Francisco, San Joaquin, Humboldt, Stanislaus, Fresno, Kern, top of the list in terms of your high crime rate, you know, as a proportion of population. That's the rate piece of that. And San Francisco obviously is represented here and has been historically, but the rest of those counties mostly have not, you know, and so I just get worried that we as a board are sort of abdicating our responsibility here that's in the statute to consider geography, you know, to consider geography and, you know, as well as the crime rate, and making sure we're targeting all victims or the greatest number of victims with this program. So, you know, I work that to take that to its logical conclusion. So if we approve this year, and the same types of applications come in next year, then I don't see anything in the process that allows the current process that allows us to think, oh well, we've got a you know, preponderance of these funded in LA, San Diego, and San Francisco. So we need to now think outside that. The process doesn't seem to allow for that sort of, you know, inter-year consideration and consideration of one region versus another. And so, you know, all that is to say that I think we as a board need to think about going forward, how we better incorporate that to make sure that we are achieving our statutory responsibility here. And I'll pause there to, you know, open up the door here for my colleagues.
Thank you, Member Johnson. I think your point is well taken, and if as a board that's the direction that we collectively want to go, then we can direct staff to do that in future application cycles. Absolutely. Member Becton, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I do. And I'm appreciative. Let me just start out by saying thank you. Thank you I appreciate, we've had a very rigorous process, you know, and I appreciate all the efforts of our staff, the board, and the public, as well as all of the TRCs who came forward to give suggestions on this process about how we can begin to think about, you know, creating a greater fairness in the distribution of such limited funds. And so I certainly want to acknowledge that the significant effort that has gone into this process. And again, this is another year of a challenge, a challenge of scarcity. We've got $10.5 million that the staff was given to work with versus the $70 million, an unprecedented amount and number of proposals that were requested. And so, although that is hugely important, I think we also have to be very candid about the implications of, the funding access or lack of, I should say. We're funding 6 centers out of more than the 40 applicants, and certainly the presentation as well as what we've read on paper is completely defensible. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, but I just want us to make sure that we, always keep in the forefront of that there are real consequences and real people's lives that are being affected. So there's the issues of equity, and certainly those have been lifted up in terms of the geographic concentration. We have obviously Southern Cal represents a huge number of our population in Contra Costa County. I'm sorry, in California, but also there are other areas like the Central Valley where we have far less services that are needed. And so in addition to thinking about the violent crime or the crime rates in certain areas, I would urge us to also think about victim impact. And I think the two are correlated, but also thinking about who loses access, but also, the number of victims that might be affected, especially in the Central Valley, and what happens to them if we have unfunded TRCs in those areas. So I think that geographic equity issue, that it would also be great in the future to think about the number of victims that might be affected in those populations. So I think just in thinking about this, I believe that staff has just done an outstanding job in trying to make sure the process was fair. But I also want us to think about the equities as we go forward in the future. And then if I may, just one other thought that comes to mind, because we know that the numbers might change or will likely change when we get the governor's May revise. And in the report, it was mentioned that there was about little over $84,000 that remained after all the funds were distributed. And obviously that's not a significant amount of money. And I understand that the staff took that small amount and split it between the two organizations that had requested more than the $2.2 million. And so given that amount, the $84,000, could not support significantly in any way another organization. But my question is whether, instead of distributing that amount now, whether we should wait until we get the May revise to see if that amount combined with the possible increase when we get the May revise might provide enough to fund an additional TRC, especially in those areas that are losing access. So that's just one thought that I have about the distribution of funds. And again, thank you for all the efforts that have gone into this process.
I think that that's definitely something the board could consider for some historical context. Last year in fiscal year 25-26, we saw a 3% about increase in the Prop 47 savings, which was around 320,000. The year before it was 700,000. And so based on recent years, we're not sure that we will still have enough to fund another organization, but we could come back in May with an update on the funding amount and if that's feasible.
Thank you. I would appreciate that. I had heard that revenues are projected better than we've thought previously, so it is possible that we'll see more. And it's probably too soon to say exactly what those numbers are going to be, but if we could come back in May, I would appreciate the opportunity to do that. It sounds like we've got a consensus that we would like to consider other ways in which we can ensure geographic equity in the distribution of TRC funds in the future. And so I'd like to request that staff, for sometime between now and maybe the fall, when the next round of TRC NOFAs are coming out, bring before the board a proposal for how we might be able to do that, and then we can consider that and discuss that as a board. But I also want to extend my sincere appreciation to the staff for all the work that you did. Nobody's happy about this situation. There's just not nearly enough money to go around to meet the very significant need. And we all recognize the very critical work that the TRCs do in their communities, and that this does, as Member Becton said, have significant impacts on people's lives when there's just not enough money to go around. But it's not something that we control as a board, and we just have to work with the money that we've got. And I feel that the distribution that the staff is proposing is equitable. So if there's no further discussion on this item from the board, yes.
Just one more question, and this is really edification. I think I understand it, but with this funding, the 2-year funding that exists from last year includes one facility in Gilroy, correct? And then is also one in the north part of the state, or has that lapsed at this point?
No, that one's still active through the end of next fiscal year, and it's primarily located in Reading, but they have some satellite locations in the northern region.
And what's just again, sort of my edification, what's the status of the pilot TRCs that were satellite?
So that funding ended at the end of last fiscal year. I believe the last pilot grant ended, I'm going off of my memory, so I might be wrong on this. I believe that grant expired in September of last year. And so some of those organizations, let me step back a little bit. The way that the pilot was structured was to say that existing organizations should apply, and then they could expand into these underserved regions. And so one of the ones for the Northern California region was funded last year for a regular grant, and they maintained both of their satellite locations. The organization that was providing pilot services in Central California did not receive renewed funding last year, and they, even in their grant application, again, I'm going off of my memory, I don't believe they were planning to maintain the satellite locations in the Central Valley based on the funding that they were requesting. And so, and their Central Valley satellite locations were also primarily telehealth services. And so they had some limited on-site activity, but it was primarily telehealth.
That's helpful. And I guess that to me elucidates up sort of even more clarity the concern that I have, which is that, you have a facility in Reading, you have a facility in Gilroy, you have the satellite facilities that were part of that pilot program, and all of those either have gone away or will, many of those have gone away or will go away, in the next year. And so I sort of just stress that if the process we went through this year with the limited funds that we have runs the same, it's hard to imagine a different outcome than what we landed on this year, unless we make this change that we've talked about. And so I don't know that I have the solution from a technical standpoint, but I do think, just getting back to the heart of this, the statute says, board shall take into account the rate of crime and geographic distribution to serve the greatest number of victims. And the map that we have and the map that is likely to result from next year wouldn't do that. And it leaves us, I think, a little bit derelict on our responsibilities. So I just want to make sure that we adjust the program. And I wrap this all in a compliment sandwich. I hate to say, but it is true that you all are doing fantastic work. And I appreciate the hard work. These are tough decisions. There's limited funding, and I know that some of this comes at the cost of considering continuity of funding with these TRCs, and I understand that's an important piece here. But I do, to the chair's point, want to see some recommendations from the staff on this. So
we can definitely bring forward recommendations. Some of them were referenced in the November item, including the concept of regional NOFAs. And so like we've said before, there's just pros and cons with this policy decision, and there are going to end up, to be blunt about it, winners and losers. And so if you if you run regional NOFAs, which is the idea, like I mentioned, we have floated before from the informational hearing, you will have to attach dollars to that, which means then we'll be saying we would only have this much money to give in those other regions, and that will result in existing organizations not receiving funding. And so it's a challenge, but we're happy to bring forward an item for consideration.
Great, thank you.
Before we go to public comment, I'd like to just take a stab at a motion, because normally we have a motion on the table before we go to public comment, if we're ready for that. I don't want to preempt if there was more conversation. Okay. So I think the proposed motion would be to approve the proposed fiscal year 2026-27 Trauma Recovery Center grant awards as recommended. However, to reserve the $84,000 extra dollars and whatever may revise numbers, and come back to the board for discussion about how best to distribute that money. Is that a fair representation of the conversation?
Yes, thank you. I think that accurately reflects what we've discussed. Thank you.
Okay, so that will be the motion on the table.
Mhm. I would just add that I know that you were rounding the number off, but it's $84,321.
Thank you very much for being more precise. I appreciate that. Thank you.
That's
Yes.
okay.
And that would be the exact motion. So
Yes.
correct.
Thank you. I so
Thank you.
move.
Thank you. Call for a second.
I'll second.
Thank you. And just to clarify, we're not voting now. We will take public comment first, and the motion could be amended after the conclusion of public comment.
Thank you. Can we have public comment?
I see Ms. Wiegall has her hand up online.
Yes.
Oh, we've
thank-
got a couple folks in the room.
Yeah.
Oh,
Ms. Turk,
okay.
yeah.
Sorry, Ms. Wiegall, we'll come to you in just a second. Yes, please.
Good morning, Board Chair Ravel, Executive Officer Gledhill, and other board members. My name is Amy Turk. I'm the CEO of Downtown Women's Center in Los Angeles. On behalf of my team of case managers and mental health professionals, we are grateful to be recommended for continued funding for our Trauma Recovery Center. Since 2015, we have partnered with Peace Over Violence, which is the founder of Denim Day. So thank you for honoring Denim Day in April, to offer our Trauma Recovery Center. Over the past 10 years, we have demonstrated that this model works. The assertive outreach, the culturally responsive services, the no-cost care is critical for our community, and without it would otherwise leave people with nowhere to go in many cases. Trauma recovery centers remove barriers, and we too are concerned that there's just not enough funding to reach all the trauma recovery centers across the state, that the needs far outweigh the capacity. So alongside with the National Alliance of Trauma Recovery Centers, we'll continue our advocacy in partnership with you and your fantastic staff to increase the pot of money and to keep this fantastic model going. Thank you for your leadership on this model and this work.
Thank you, Ms. Turk, for coming all the way up and for your service to the community in LA County. Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Michelle Ornelas Knight, and I'm the director of the UC Davis Trauma Recovery Center. Unfortunately, we were not funded this go around. I appreciate the board's willingness to hear the public comment. I'm here on behalf of my very dedicated and committed team and all the survivors of violent crime that we're currently serving. The core tenet of the Trauma Recovery Center model is the removal of barriers to care, and the expansion of equitable services, right, where it's about accessibility, and that is one of the core tenets. Defunding an established trauma recovery center undermines this by eliminating a trusted provider that is currently providing these services to the community and to current victims of crime. We follow the collaborative care model, the integrated trauma services model that is developed by the state pilot, UCSF. We are the only, besides UCSF, we're the only level 1 adult and pediatric trauma center in the northern region. And as such, we serve all the surrounding counties. And it provides us the ability to provide that bedside engagement in the ED working with families. And we are able and have been asked and currently serve more rural counties, such as San Joaquin and Stanislaus, where they don't have access to trauma services or a trauma recovery center. We are also currently providing treatment to parents of child homicide victims. And we are equipped because of our experience in providing equity, culturally responsive, evidence-based treatment to manage those services for complex trauma and complex grief related to the loss of a child. We've also discovered in our work with patients that many of them, because of the lack of equitable care accessible to them, have histories of sexual abuse that have never been treated. And they have come to our center because of the trust that we've been able to establish with them because of the assertive outreach and the ongoing, unrelentless outreach and engagement we provided to disclose that and then be open to receiving care for both the violent crime and the sexual abuse. The current 2-year funding cycle does not support the establishment and sustainability for the critical services of trauma recovery centers. And unfortunately, because the UC Davis TRC is defunded, we will have a service gap in this community and in the surrounding counties. There is currently no funding source, and that's what's wonderful about the Trauma Recovery Center and this funding source, but there is no current service provider. There are no organizations that have funding to provide the bedside engagement and trauma screening in hospitals. The relentless outreach and assertive case management that TRC model provides, the coordinated multidisciplinary team approach, for case management and engagement that the TRC provides, which is critical and what defines the TRC model. So thank you. I appreciate everyone's effort. I know this was an incredible effort and to balance the significant imbalance of need and funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nellis Knight, for coming and providing comment today and for your service to our community. Okay, Ms. Wigall, now we can turn to you.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I am Stacy Wigall, the Director of Training and Technical Assistance for the National Alliance of Trauma Recovery Centers. I just wanted to say our Senior Director, Janelle Malone, is out of the country, or she'd be here today as well. And we want to acknowledge the CalVCP team's efforts toward incorporating feedback and toward continuous improvement of management of the TRC grant program, as has been presented today and as we've been hearing about. We've also all been aware that the reduction in Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act funds caused by the passage of Prop 36 would result in the reduced funding for the TRC grant program that we're seeing right now in California. The recommendations proposed today are to award funding to 4 of the 9 existing TRCs and to not award grant funding to 5 of the 9 existing TRCs. It also includes recommending funding for 2 of the 6 TRCs that were defunded in the last grant cycle. We want to share that the NATRC is continuing our efforts to advocate for more Trauma Recovery Center funds now for the next fiscal year, and have received sign-on support from multiple California state legislators in the Assembly towards this effort. If we're successful, we will advocate for language to fund additional proposals from existing TRCs in this application cycle, rather than waiting until next year to allocate funds. As we're also just hearing from the director of the UC Davis Health TRC, we know how communities are impacted by the loss of a TRC, and that survivors of violence lose the essential support and services that they need access to every time a TRC has to close its doors. And especially in these times, when so many programs are under-resourced by federal funding losses, the TRC safety net is just more critical than ever. We will definitely keep in communication with the CalVCB and the TRCs about funding advocacy efforts. And also it sounds like there's reason for optimism about increases that may come from the May budget revise. So we are very hopeful that a solution will be found that will also result in keeping existing TRC's doors open, with the mindfulness of geography and needs for higher rates of violent crime taken into consideration as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Wiggall, for your comments and for your advocacy. Ms. Velez.
Thank you. It's odd to not be seen at all, but perhaps you can see me. So I just wanted to express appreciation. I'm the Director of Special Projects for Reach the Valley, which is a funded TRC, which is going to be able to continue with much needed support. So I just wanted to make a couple of hopefully relevant comments and echo what LA Women's Center was able to communicate in terms of the effectiveness of the services for much needed areas. And I just wanted to share that we are the only TRC being funded in Riverside County. And so despite the fact that we are in Southern California, we actually serve a huge geographical area, which is 700 square miles, and includes many rural communities which would not have access to any kind of care otherwise. So I know sometimes when you look at the map, and Riverside is such a huge county, it might look like we're sort of globbed in with the rest of Southern California. But I just wanted to make a little bit of an educational comment that you are funding an area of great deal of need in eastern Riverside County that would otherwise not have access. It's a historically underserved area, really basically poor, and with a majority minority population, and a high violent crime rate. So I just want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for continuing to support what we're able to do for folks that really would not have access to any kind of services of this quality. And we would definitely like to be part of expanding the funding base, and also even just the conversations about how the funding might be more equitably distributed from the board's perspective. So thank you so much, and I'm just jumping in on behalf of our director, Gail Hepner, to be able to share those comments with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Velez, for appearing and for the services that your organization provides in that critical area. If there's no further public comment, the motion on the table is to adopt the staff recommendation for the distribution of the TRC grant awards, with the exception of reserving the $84,321 and any potential may revise bonus or additional funds. And we can revisit that in May and see how much is left over. Okay, council, please, okay, yes, please call the roll.
Member Becton.
Aye.
Member Johnson.
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Item 7 is the Penal Code Section 4900 claim of Robert Anderson, which will be presented by Acting Chief Counsel Laura Simpton.
On October 6, 2023, Robert Anderson submitted a claim to the California Victim Compensation Board as an erroneously convicted person. That application was based on his 2009 convictions for murder and attempted murder as an accomplice, which were vacated due to a change in the law defining accomplice liability pursuant to Penal Code Section 1172.6. The claim seeks $775,460 for 5,539 days imprisonment. The Attorney General objected to the claim, arguing the evidence fails to prove Mr. Anderson's innocence by a preponderance. As detailed in the hearing officer's proposed decision, the claim is recommended for denial because Mr. Anderson has failed to meet his burden under Subdivision A of Penal Code Section 4900 to prove by a preponderance of the evidence that he did not commit the charged crimes as they were defined at the time of their commission. Throughout the administrative proceedings, Mr. Anderson represented himself, and the Office of the Attorney General was represented by Deputy Attorney General Cameron Goodman.
Thank you, Counsel. Mr. Anderson in the room or online? No. Okay, thank you. Then we will hear from Cameron Goodman from the Attorney General's office.
Good morning, Board. I'll keep this brief because it doesn't need to be too long. We respectfully recommend that the Board adopt the hearing officer's proposed decision in full. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goodman. Is there any discussion of this item by the Board? Do I have a motion on item 7?
I move to adopt the hearing officer's proposed decision in the Penal Code Section 4900 matter of Robert Anderson.
And I'll second.
Is there any public comment on this item?
Counsel, please call the roll.
The motion before the board is adoption of the hearing officer's proposed decision in the Penal Code Section 4900 matter of Robert Anderson. Member Becton.
Aye.
Member Johnson.
Aye.
And Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes.
The Board will now convene into closed session under Government Code Section 11126 sub A to discuss the California State Audit 2025 and under sub C3 to discuss numbers 1 through 120 of the Victim Compensation Program.
I appreciate that. And it's mostly thinking about, when we were
The board is now reconvening into open session under Government Code Section 11126 sub C3. Do I have a motion for numbers 1 through 120 of the Victim Compensation Program?
I'll move to approve.
Call for a second.
I second.
Council, please call the roll.
Motion before the board is approval of numbers 1 through 120 of the Victim Compensation Program. Member Becton.
Aye.
Member Johnson.
Aye.
And Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Council. Is there any other business that needs to come before the board today? Seeing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move
I'll
the
move-
meeting be adjourned.
And I'll second.
Council, please call the roll.
Member Becton.
Aye.
Member Johnson.
Aye.
And Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you back in May.
As a reminder, the next board meeting, I know Member Becton, we've moved it to May 28th. I know you have travel before that, but May 28th is the next board meeting.
Yes, and barring any flight delays, I will be present.
We wish you safe travels and
Thank you.
thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. See you next time.